This is the Heel to the Face podcast. Daniel Fishel, who was one half of the couple that I always wanted to be and always judged every single relationship I was in against, being Corey and Tapanga from Boy Meets World. You may also know her from after Boy Meets World. She was a host of Dance Off, Hands Off on Fuse, which made her not just the love of my life when I was younger, but the sex symbol when I was older. Well, she is currently married to a man named Jansen Kep. And right now, they are currently huge wrestling fans. And on a wrestling podcast called Wrestling with Will, Danielle Fishel said that she is not against the idea of joining the wrestling world someday. She feels she's a little old to join wrestling, but maybe as a manager. Brandon, do you want to see Tapanga in the WWE as the next Miss Elizabeth?
Sign me up. I am on board 110%.
He's Brandon. I'm Jared. This is the Heel to the Face podcast, and it starts right now.
Fans celebrate with me from Rome to Rochester.
Bad election would be my middle name. They might as well tag me up with my buddy from Syracuse.
This is the Heel to the Face podcast. He's Brandon. I'm Jared. If you're listening, I'm Jared. He's Brandon, the quiet one that's not speaking at the moment. Follow the program on Heel to the Face on Twitter, and make sure to subscribe and get notified. On the teaser before we started, we talked about Danielle Fishel, better known as Tapanga from Boy Meets World. A fun thing about her new husband, Jansen Kemp, or Karp, I'm not sure, I don't have it right in front of me, but he is the only person in the whole world to have spoken at Oxford University and performed at the Gathering of the Juggalos, which is the big Insane Clown Posse Festival every single year. So the only person, and you can imagine that doesn't need to be verified and checked, that there's only been one person in the whole world that has spoken in front of Oxford University and at the Gathering of the Juggalos. But interesting fact, we were talking about Danielle Fishel and how she's become a wrestling fan because of her marriage to this man. Well, he was in 2006 a writer for WWE Raw. She's a big fan of Pro Wrestling Guerrilla out in the California area, and we were talking. She says she's not against joining the world of wrestling as a manager. She's not against joining as a wrestler. She just feels that it might be a little bit too late as she turns 40 years old this year. Does that make you feel old, Brandon, that Tapanga is turning 40 years old this year?
Yeah, dude, when you said she was 40, I'm thinking to myself, how is that possible? And damn, you and I are getting old, brother.
The podcast she was on, Wrestling with Will, gives this podcast a lot of hope because it only has 2 videos posted. One about 4 months ago that had about 700 views, and this one that they currently are putting out, which has about 1,000 views right now with Danielle Fishel. So, I mean, if this guy has a total of 2,000 views, which I'm not speaking highly of our podcast because we are not high up there in the YouTube cloud, but we actually probably have total. I mean, it's taken a couple of years, more than 2,000 total views, and his total view right now is at about 2,000 over 2 videos. So that shows you can jump. I mean, because like I said, his last video before this one had 700 views, and this is his first video with over 1,000 views. I guess we could probably have that too. I just need to know how to get Tapanga on the show, and we'll be off and running, I guess. But to the more pressing world of professional wrestling, as we move away from Tapanga, and we talk about the big story that happened this week, kind of out of nowhere. Give it to WWE, because I was thinking, you have how many hours of wrestling every single week, and you choose a non-wrestling program to announce the future of Wrestlemania. And they didn't just announce Wrestlemania this year. They went all on board with the next couple years, something they've never done. It was unprecedented. Nobody saw it coming. Even the Twitter accounts that are pretty smart and on top of this stuff didn't see it coming, and out of the blue, WrestleMania this year, WrestleMania next year, WrestleMania the year after. But I give it to WWE because, yeah, to be honest with you, how many people watch Raw? How many people watch SmackDown? A decent amount, but not nearly as much as are going to be watching these NFL football playoff games. So if you got something important to say, you want to put a lot of eyeballs on it, that's the avenue you're going to take. I mean, I would love to make a big announcement here on the Heel of the Face podcast about something about our show, on our program, and our platform, what we created. But if I had a huge wrestling scoop, that I was really wanting to get out there, and I had the choice of doing it exclusively on the show we created, or, I don't know, on Sunday Night Football, I'm not going to lie, I'd probably pick Sunday Night Football.
Yeah, I think you're going to slightly get a few more views.
Yes. But either way, WrestleMania, Raymond James Stadium, you have to imagine, as Stephanie McMahon and everybody's been talking about it, the plan is to have fans Brandon, what's some more news that you've heard as the week has gone on when it comes to having fans for WrestleMania this year?
Latest word, we're going to have, you're going to like this, partially, I think. So it's going to be a 2-night event from all reports out there. And here's the nice thing. Their goal is to make it no more than 3 hours each night and be out by 10 o'clock each night. And to get to the fans part, the projections at this point, what I've been hearing and what I've been looking at all over the internet, is they're trying to do 25,000 people each night. I think that's a good start. I know we were talking about on previous episodes. So if you get 25,000 in there, that's going to make a whole hell of a lot of a difference when it comes to just the whole package, because that's the thing we've been missing. Yes, the Thunderdome has its, it's not bad. It's better than not having anything at all, of course. But when you have real live people in the audience, it's going to make the program so much better. And I have to say this, good call by WWE to get the announcement out to not only knock out one, but multiple WrestleManias on a big NFL playoff broadcast. You can't beat it. Good job on WWE's part. Kudos to them.
Ticket information for WrestleMania, I think, is going to come after another certain event that is happening in Tampa, probably maybe television-wise a little bit bigger, being the Super Bowl, because I think the Super Bowl is going to be a huge – it's kind of weird. Normally things don't use the Super Bowl as an indication about how they're going to run things. Sometimes the Super Bowl uses them. But this case, WrestleMania is going to try to use the Super Bowl as, I guess, the trial run of Raymond James Stadium to see how they could actually probably top that. The Super Bowl right now is projecting about 22,000 fans for the Super Bowl. And I think WrestleMania, obviously not just from a fan's perspective about how many people are going to be there, but I think they're going to see how the protocols work, where the fans sit, how the testing works. Do people need to come with vaccines or without vaccines? How the spacing works, how other events around, because the Super Bowl, just like WrestleMania, they want to have access. They want to have Fan Fest. They want to have all that good stuff going on outside of the event itself. So they're going to look at that. What convention center are they using? Which convention center gives them the best chance of having an access, that kind of stuff. From all indications, it seems that the Hall of Fame ceremony this year is going to be done virtually, so it looks like we will have a Hall of Fame, and I can only imagine it'll include the class that we were supposed to have last year. But to be honest with you, and I've read a lot on Twitter, in years past, and I guess this is what makes our show, I guess, a little bit better, is that you have somebody like myself, and I'm not trying to be pretentious or talk myself up, but a lot of wrestling fans are indeed wrestling fans, and I'm one of those people. And I read a lot on Twitter, and I read a lot on social media about WrestleMania being 2 nights. And here's why WrestleMania is 2 nights. Because outside of being a wrestling fan, I love logistics. I love business. I love things that are not just wrestling and sports from the on-field perspective. I love looking at the ins and outs. We both work in radio, so we both know sports as sports, but we also know sports as in a business and how it's run and the buttons you push and the editing done. So with that being said, here's why WrestleMania is 2 nights this year. It is not because they are doing the fans a favor for not having to sit through 7 hours of wrestling in one night and you get bored by it, or having to sit through it in the audience or via TV. That is not why. And part of what makes me assured, because I haven't spoken with Triple H or Vince McMahon to guarantee that this is my theory, but if that was the case, WrestleMania would not be 1 night next year and 1 night the following year, which it's being advertised at. It's only being advertised as 2 nights this year and 2 nights last year. And I'll tell you why it was 2 nights last year, and I'll tell you why it's 2 nights this year. They're different reasons. Last year, it was because you had NXT and you had the Hall of Fame, which are huge live events on the WWE network that are going to draw your biggest numbers of the year, and those events were wiped out. And all of a sudden now your WrestleMania weekend, which is the reason why some people get a whole year's subscription, is wiped out. And you just have now the single event. You then wanted to maximize as much live television and programming on your network as you could and get as many eyeballs on it, because we all know we watch WWE Network. I know you do. I do randomly. Sometimes I go a whole month without watching it, minus the pay-per-view events. But it's the pay-per-view events that keep us subscribed, the live events that keep us subscribed. And they wanted to have the most amount of television that they could that weekend. So why have it 1 night when you don't have TakeOver and you don't have the Hall of Fame, might as well spread it out. And also the idea of the fact that they were filming matches on different nights and didn't maybe know if they would have certain matches, completed in time for night 1 versus night 2. But this reason for this year why it's 2 nights, I think, is because also, again, you are not going to have the events. You're not going to have the takeovers. You're not going to have the Hall of Fame. You're not going to have other wrestling companies come in there. But at the same time, your promise to Tampa and the politicians is that you are going to bring money to your city. Because if WrestleMania wasn't 2 nights this year, I could tell you that Tampa probably wouldn't want it. Because when it comes to any large event, when you have an event, you're probably not going to get one for a while. And especially after this COVID where you had WrestleMania, then you lost it, and now you're having it again. This is Tampa's last shot. And what I mean by last shot is you're not going to see him come back to Tampa for at least 5 years, or even probably put it on the table for 5 years. Because once this is done and once they're out of Florida, WWE is going to want to be out of Florida for a while. I mean, they've been here for so long now. You're exhausting this. So if this was Tampa's last chance at hosting a WrestleMania, meaning if they could have this year's WrestleMania or next year's WrestleMania, the only way that they want it is not because they're big wrestling fans, is if it brings money to the city. And if WrestleMania is a one-night event and doesn't have Raw and doesn't have TakeOver, then you're not going to get people traveling in, and you're not going to get people that are going to spend time in your city. By WrestleMania being 2 nights this year, if I go to WrestleMania, what that guarantees is I have to get at least 1 night to the hotel. I have to stay at least Saturday night, if not Friday night. If WrestleMania is a one-night event, I mean, there's a reason why WrestleMania is this big deal. And when pay-per-views come to Buffalo and pay-per-views come to Rochester or Albany, it is not the same deal, because people like myself who live locally just drive into town, go out to eat, maybe, go to the event, go home. I don't go to the malls. I don't go to the attractions.
So you don't, you don't go to like Duff's on the way to Buffalo for some wings? I mean, come on now.
I do, but Buffalo doesn't have a press conference for when they are getting Extreme Rules or Battleground, because it's going to bring $100 million into the city. WrestleMania brings hundreds of millions of dollars into the city, not because of ticket sales, which mostly go to WWE. It's because people come into the city and they stay there for a week. And in this case, this year, no, they won't stay there for a week because there'll be nothing going on. But they want them to stay as long as they possibly can.
I will argue this, though. With the pandemic going on, there are 2 states, if I don't follow the news like, nonstop by any means. But from what I remember and what I've noticed lately and seen it online, is you got 2 states that really, they've taken a different approach to, handling the pandemic with COVID. It's Florida and it's Texas. From all accounts that I've read, Florida's ready to open everything right up and just have full capacity again. Which, that's not our place to sit here and say, yeah, you should do it or not. That, we're not a political show by any means. But that can't hurt, having WWE in town saying, hey, we'll put fans in the stands. You want fans back in an event? Let's get something worked out. And I think you're right. I think the Super Bowl is the way to go to see where we're going to be. Now, I did see that they are taking very extreme protocols with the NFL Super Bowl coming up here very soon. They're going to have, I think, 7,500 of those tickets out of the 22,000 that you said. They're going to be all healthcare workers, and those are free tickets. The remaining portions are going to be spread out amongst each. They're going to be healthcare workers in each city in which an NFL team, is currently playing at. So it's going to be a little bit more tight-lipped. It's not going to be as many, quote-unquote, fans, like just you, average Joes like you and me going to the game. It's going to be a lot of healthcare workers. It's going to be very strict. So I'm curious to see how this plays out with how WWE is going to handle it. Whether they're going to just give it away the same way with healthcare workers, I don't know. That's to be determined. But I will say this. From all accounts that I've read, and I do follow the stock market and things like that, and I read a lot of different articles about that, of course, and all reports that I'm seeing is we should be out of this pandemic by the summer. And when I read that, I couldn't believe my eyes, because we've been in it almost a year now. So if I see June or July on a horizon where we're back to, normal, where we got fans in the stands, the next big event will be SummerSlam with fans, with, maybe full fans again, which would be fantastic.
Yeah, no. Are you going to tell that to your kids, Brandon? when your kid gets older, let's say they're 18 years old and they're trying to tell you that the Super Bowl is a big deal, are you going to tell them the Super Bowl, a big deal, I guess? Back in my day when you were just a lad, it wasn't that big of a deal. Your mom, who's a nurse, they tried giving her tickets and we turned them down because we didn't want to drive to Florida for it. $2,000 for tickets. Go back 20 years. They were free. Go ask. Yeah, they were giving away to nurses. It wasn't that big of a deal. A high school band was playing the halftime show. That's what you're going to tell them when they turn 18. Because at least for this year, that was true. 80,000 for the Super Bowl. They couldn't get 22,000 in an 80,000 seat stadium back in 2021. COVID. I never heard of COVID. They probably just didn't want to sell the extra tickets. That's why they couldn't sell them. They had to give them away.
I will say this. In all seriousness, I just hope it goes off with no issues, because if it goes off with no issues, not only is that a good thing for us as a society, but it's a trickle-down effect. And I know you're a sports fan on top of wrestling as well. It means we can go back to maybe going to see games and maybe an AEW show coming to Rochester sooner rather than later. So let's keep our fingers crossed for a good Super Bowl, which it should be, and everybody gets out of there in one piece, so to speak.
I am hoping to the fact that there are still some travel restrictions in other countries, and that people are still, weary to travel, to use that in my favor because of the fact that there's only going to be, like you said, about 25,000 tickets. And the reason why the WrestleManias that I've attended have never been the ones at Madison Square Garden or the Allstate Arena in Chicago, because when you have that little amount of tickets available, they are very hard to get your hands on. And word is that an average WrestleMania, I was reading earlier today when they were talking about ticket sales, an average WrestleMania draws about 20,000 people just from the local market alone each and every year. So I'm hoping that some people not being able to travel, some people maybe being a little leery, opens the door for me to get my hands on one of those 25,000 tickets, because that's the only thing stopping me right now. April 10th and 11th, I plan to be down in Tampa because it is going to be nice and warm. It is a little frustrating this year because it is going to be the latest ever that a WrestleMania has taken place. And WWE actually plans to have a pay-per-view on March 21st, the Fastlane pay-per-view, which is actually later in the calendar year than 3 WrestleManias in the past. So it's strange that originally WrestleMania was supposed to be March 28th this year. And as of right now, March 21st, we're having a Fastlane pay-per-view.
Which makes zero sense. It makes zero sense to me. Right before the biggest show of the year, for me, how you got to do it, how I would do it because of how things are going. Royal Rumble, take the time. I honestly would do Royal Rumble. You maybe put an NXT takeover somewhere in the middle, and then WrestleMania. You don't need to have Fastlane so damn close. It's within a couple weeks that you can't do that. To me, it just makes zero sense. That's not how WWE should be doing it. Let's spread it out a little bit more, because here's the thing, especially if you're going to be able to go to these events like I know you're trying to, in April. Imagine this. You're watching Royal Rumble, and you're like, and then there's nothing advertised from Royal Rumble to WrestleMania. That's going to make everybody want to go to WrestleMania, right? That wants to go.
Yeah.
I know you want to go, so.
Right now, the rumor is right now that with WrestleMania being 2 nights, that they want to have 2 major matches per night. They want the show to be about 3 to 4 hours long, 2 major matches each night. Mm-hmm. So as of right now, Goldberg and John Cena appear to be locks. Brock Lesnar right now, as of right now, isn't a lock, but I imagine I'd put him in a better category than in the NCAA tournament bubble. I would say he's a pretty shoe-in for the event. And another person who's not off the table, Rock apparently is off the table, but one person who isn't off the table, according to many people in the know, is the Undertaker. What would your opinion be about the Undertaker being there in any capacity?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But I want to take a step back. You mentioned Brock Lesnar, and you know how I feel about Brock Lesnar. Our fans of the show, they know how I feel about Brock Lesnar. But I have to do something that I haven't done in a long time about Brock Lesnar. I don't have a hat on, but I'm doing the proverbial tip of the cap, because what I've been reading is Brock Lesnar now, at this stage in his career, he doesn't care about championships. He wants to get people over, and he feels like if they get the Brock Lesnar rub, that they're going to be a superstar. And he even said, I've been reading all these articles, that he's got to change of heart on things. He doesn't want to be a champion. He wants to work with some of the younger superstars to help them make themselves a bigger star than what they are. And if that is really the truth from all the reports that I've been reading online, that is absolutely fantastic news. And I got to tip my cap to Brock Lesnar for that.
So nice. It seems like just yesterday Brock Lesnar was a nobody himself until he took on this guy called The Undertaker, WrestleMania 30, and The Undertaker lost his streak just so that people would know who Brock Lesnar is, to get him over and to help him start his career. And it's nice to Brock Lesnar to pay it forward after getting such a gracious start in wrestling from Undertaker. I mean, if he didn't beat The Undertaker that night, who'd even know if we'd ever heard of Brock Lesnar? Who'd know if his career would ever have taken off if he didn't end the streak that night in New Orleans? So Undertaker gives his streak up to Brock Lesnar graciously, without Vince McMahon suggesting it at all. It was 100% The Undertaker, and Vince McMahon is like, no, don't. I want Brock Lesnar, him? He's not believable. Brock Lesnar, that guy's a loser. Undertaker, squash him. Don't lose to him. He's awful. But Undertaker's like, no, this guy's good. I'm going to lose to him at WrestleMania. And Vince is like, all right, Undertaker, And then Vince saw something in Brock Lesnar that night and said, all right, I'll give you a chance. I'll let you hold the championship 1, 2, 3, 100 times and let you have the belt without coming to Raw, without coming to SmackDown, and doing whatever you want with it, and always beating everybody for the belt and being in every WrestleMania. So thank The Undertaker for letting Brock Lesnar become a household name, because never heard of the guy before 2014.
I will say this. I don't think a lot of superstars right now are thanking The Undertaker because of his recent comments on the Joe Rogan podcast. He had some comments that really agitated a lot of the newer wrestlers. I guess I don't have the quote in front of me, but I just remember reading about it, and I did see the clip from Joe Rogan's podcast. And he pretty much went along the lines and said the wrestlers of today are not real tough guys. They're not real wrestlers like they were back in the day. So it was like a shot that, the kids nowadays are soft, and the guys back when he wrestled are tough guys. I got to get your thoughts on that, because here's the thing. I agree with it 110%. I don't think it's just a wrestling thing. I think it's just a worldwide thing. I just think people are a little more sensitive than they are nowadays because of, social media and this and that. And I think Undertaker's onto something. I don't care what he says. I mean, I don't think it was insensitive. I think he was just keeping it straight, because back in the day, Bradshaw was doing a lot of things, John Bradshaw Layfield. And guess what? If he would have done those things nowadays, he's out of the business for good. He's kicked out because of all the different things he's done and a lot of the other superstars have done. So my question to you is, do you agree with what Undertaker's saying, or do you disagree?
I disagree. And I will say that Undertaker, for something I read more recently than just his Joe Rogan podcast outside of The Undertaker, maybe should be treading lightly. I feel like something is going to come to the surface, or at least Undertaker's going to have to answer a question that's coming to the surface in a short period of time. I'll get to that in a second. But the reason I think that wrestlers aren't necessarily soft is wrestling evolves. It's like anything else. He's seen wrestling evolve. He's seen it come from the cartoon era when he started to the Attitude Era to the Ruthless Aggression Era. And right now, I think what fans want to see is they want to see the AJ Styles, the High Flyers, the Finn Balor's, people like that. And I think that's the way the wrestling world is going. Social media, the way we get our media, the way that people are. Wrestling goes with the times. The Attitude Era went right with South Park and Jackass and the Osbournes. It went hand in hand with that. The Monica Lewinsky trial, all that kind of stuff. And wrestling going with the times right now is more of, what the fans want to see in the sense of what we see with NXT, a little less gimmicky, a little more brute wrestling matches, but without big Brock Lesnar, Undertaker-looking dudes. More guys who don't necessarily look like your neighbor, like a Kevin Owens, but people who are pretty fit. They look more like wide receivers. They look more like jacked baseball players.
What are you saying about Kevin Owens?
Fighters.
What are you saying about Kevin Owens? He's in great shape. I don't care what he looks like. That guy can go all day long. He gives anybody with a dad bod out there, hey, props to Kevin Owens. He's a great athlete. I just got to throw that out there.
No, he's a great athlete, but I just feel like I think we'd have a problem if the entire company of WWE was all wearing a T-shirt in their matches.
I agree.
And just can't have 100 Kevin Owenses. He fits the role perfectly. He is the one and only person who essentially can do that.
Yeah.
But Finn Balor, Pete Dunne, Walter, I don't think those guys are not tough. I don't think those guys don't put on great matches. I don't think those guys want to go out there and not tear the house down. Yeah, you don't have the big tough guys, the Yokozunas. You don't have the Kanes. You don't have the Undertakers. You don't have, I guess, the Triple H's, who's a bigger gentleman himself. But that's not the style right now. That's not the trend. You got to go with what the fans want. If the fans wanted more Brock Lesnar, if the fans wanted more Goldberg, which they don't, then they would say it. They would make that known. And what I was alluding to start this is I don't know if this was in response to what the Undertaker said about people being soft on the Joe Rogan podcast, but somebody close to Chris Kanyon, I don't know if it was him himself, but somebody close to Chris Kanyon put out, and I don't want to verify that this is a verified story or anything like that, but it was put out earlier today on the internet, so we'll keep it as that without saying this is news. But that when Chris Kanyon returned from injury in 2003, he pitched a storyline to Vince McMahon where he was going to be an outed gay man, which he is in real life, but not in a gimmicky sense. What ended up happening is that his return was via inside a box, a present from the Big Show to the big evil Undertaker at the time when Big Show and Undertaker were feuding. As on SmackDown, he was put in a box, dressed like Boy George, and came out of the box singing, "Do You Really Want to Hurt Me?" while dressed like Boy George, while then the Undertaker went to town on him, realizing it was a joke on the Undertaker from the Big Show, probably making light of, his femininity or his lack of masculine Chris Kanyon, more of his gay type character. And the Undertaker being a very masculine man, feeling, I guess, a certain way about that his gimmick was to beat up Chris Kanyon. And the word is that, and I seen the video itself, and I don't really know until Undertaker says something, but the word is, and again, they're saying this 20 years later, that Undertaker, the veteran of the locker room, did things to Chris Kanyon, whether it be, chair shots to the head, a chair shot to the back, because his gimmick was he needed to then beat this guy up to get to the Big Show, and kind of took out some liberties, treated him, I guess, Maven style, as we saw how the Undertaker treated Maven at the Royal Rumble, and felt that was, in a time when Chris Kanyon was trying to come out as a homosexual and wanted to have a character that actually acknowledged that, it ended up backfiring. He ended up being a character that was a stereotypical homosexual who was looked at as weak and looked at as somebody like that the Undertaker should just demolish. And he, or somebody close to him, is saying that the Undertaker, who was supposed to be a leader of the locker room, took some liberties and kind of made an example out of him. John Cena has been on the record of saying that he didn't know Chris Kanyon was gay until he got fired, and he thinks the reason he got fired was just because he wasn't any good, and he was as good as he could be, which wasn't good enough, and doesn't think that there was any sort of discriminatory practices by Vince McMahon. But again, I feel like Undertaker, somebody's going to have to ask him this now, and it might have come out because Undertaker said people are softer nowadays, and it might have come out as saying, well, you're kind of a bully in a way. So we'll see what the Undertaker has to say about it. But to the original point, I think fans are that's what's driving this thing. Fans, they want to see certain things, and I like where we are right now in WWE when it comes to athleticism. Maybe not storylines exactly. I'm fine with Randy Orton and Bray Wyatt. I'm fine with Finn Balor and Pete Dunne. I'm fine with Adam Cole. I'm fine with the cruiserweight in the 205 at their level and what they can do. I'm fine with the tag teams. I don't think anybody is weak. Maybe they're weak in the sense of they're not training as hard.
I will say this. I think what Undertaker was. I think it's just this. I think it's a stylistic thing. I think for Undertaker, I think he just doesn't like the high flying, style that you see not only in WWE but you also see in AEW and other promotions around the world. Maybe that's where he's going. I mean, I'm not inside Undertaker's head. That's his own space, so to speak. But I think that's where he was going. I don't know if that's, maybe it was characterized differently by the social media world. I don't know, but I still want to see what happens with that Chris Kanyon story because I've read a lot about the Chris Kanyon stuff, and And his last few days were not a good few days. Unfortunately, things went a certain way, and he's not. He left the earth way too soon. And a lot of people respected him. I know he was good friends with folks like Diamond Dallas Page was one guy in particular that I know was a huge Chris Kanyon guy. There were some other names as well. So I'm kind of curious to see what happens there. I don't know. We don't know. We weren't there. We weren't backstage. So, I mean, it's honestly, at this point, it's hearsay. So we just kind of have to see what Undertaker says with it.
Moving on to some of the stories that kind of wrap things up for this week's edition. We got a few things to cover when you talk about tough guys. No one's tougher than Karrion Kross. He comes back from being injured, and the first thing he does is injure someone else. He injured Ashanti Adonis this week during their NXT match, which means Ashanti Adonis and Desmond Troy will not be able to compete in their Dusty Rhodes Classic Tournament match after SmackDown on Friday night during 205 Live. Instead, it's going to be the men we saw in the pit, if you will, and what was it, the fight pit they call it on NXT. Great match, brutal match between Thatcher and Tommaso Ciampa. Well, they're going to team up on 205 Live because for some reason it doesn't need to be 205 Live anymore because we got Candice LeRae and India Hartwell teaming up for the Women's Classic in a match on 205 Live. And now we have this men's match against Daivari and Tony Nese on the men's side. And, I think knowing with 205 Live and to kind of break away from what I just said with Karrion Kross and how he injured Ashanti, but actually go to 205 Live and talk about these matches, it makes me think that this is a great opportunity to make 205 Live, first off, change the name, and make this maybe a different kind of NXT show, because that's really what it is. Obviously, the NXT Cruiserweight Champion is exactly that, the NXT Cruiserweight Champion. It's not its own thing anymore where it's on its own show. 205 Live is now just an extension of NXT where it's a developmental ground. Obviously, you look at the people like Cedric Alexander and Buddy Murphy, who came out of 205 Live to make it to the main roster, showing you the 205 Live is not the main roster. And I think this could be a great step in moving Monday Night Raw back to 2 hours by making still 3 hours television-wise of 1 hour being, I guess an NXT supplement show like we're going to see after SmackDown, and then the 2 hours being Raw. So you still have that 3 hours of wrestling, but you don't have that 3 hours of one program. I mean, and then SmackDown, I think, can find another, same thing. They can take main event or superstars, whatever the hell these other, the dark matches, the things they kind of tape. But I think that's a good way to maybe move Raw going back to 2 hours would be to take this 205 Live show. Because now that SmackDown is live, the 205 Live, I think, has lost its momentum in the fact that SmackDown's on Friday nights. When it was on Tuesday nights, I felt that its viewership was good because Monday and Tuesday, you had great viewership for wrestling. Tuesday, you not really have too much competition. The fact that show was live, you went over to the WWE Network to watch 205 Live. But now that it's on Friday nights, which Friday night for somebody like myself in a normal time is hard to watch wrestling. So I'm not going to tune on 205 Live on a Friday night. I mean, it's already hard enough to be tuning on SmackDown when I want to be out in the town. But to watch a show like 205 Live, that's a good Tuesday night show. That'd be a great show. In fact, if you taped it on Monday night with Monday Night Raw and put it up against AEW Dark, I think that would be a good solution. Make it an NXT supplement show and then air it on Tuesday nights on the WWE Network in the 10 o'clock time slot, against people watching Dark. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good idea. I think AEW Dark is a really good niche, and I think having that 205 Live style, against it, I think is a great idea. I do want to ask you something about AEW this week. Well, actually, two things. What are your thoughts on Top Flight? I'm enjoying Top Flight. I know Undertaker, as we just talked about, is probably not a fan of their style, but I think Top Flight, I think those guys, they got a great chance to be megastars in the tag team division for a long time. I do think AEW has a really good division right now. Private Party's another young team that's now working with Big Money Matt. So I got to get your thoughts on that. I mean, which tag team, I would say, let me rephrase this, which young tag team in AEW specifically do you see making a big run going forward? Because I think Top Flight's the team to look for.
I mean, Top Flight for sure. I mean, Private Party, I enjoyed that they went over to Impact Wrestling this past week. Obviously, we're coming off Hard to Kill with Kenny Omega and those guys winning the main event match at Hard to Kill. I think the match of the night at that pay-per-view was Sami Callihan and Eddie Edwards in the Barbed Wire Massacre. Other than that, the event was kind of lackluster for me. But Private Party showing up on Impact to keep the rivalry going, to show that it's more than just Kenny Omega. It's actually Impacted versus AEW or vice versa. And I kind of like that going. It's better than the WCW WWF invasion because both companies are still active. This isn't one company that does it. WCW invading WWE didn't really work because WCW didn't exist. It wasn't active. It wasn't a company anymore. So the invasion, and obviously we could do hours on the horrible that invasion. So this invasion is at least a little bit better than that. But yeah, no, I think AEW, they're not hurting in the tag team division really at all. I think that's one of their strong points. Kenny Omega this past week says he thinks that maybe the women deserve their own show. And I will say to Kenny Omega that no, they do not. They are not at that point yet. No. WWE is much higher point when it comes to women's wrestling right now. AEW is not at a point yet where the women should even be main eventing a pay-per-view, let alone have its own show. So I disagree with Kenny Omega there. I think they're strong in their main eventers. They're strong in tag teams, but they're not strong yet in the women's division. They're getting there. They have the old CM Punk follower, Serena Deeb, as the NWA champion, showing up on the show. And Conti, I think, has been great. I think she's been really good, but they're not there yet as, in the WWE's women's division.
I'll tell you a sleeper in that division for AEW is that I think her name's Layla Hirsch. She's really good. She put on a good match this week against Penelope Ford. Penelope obviously won the match. Underhanded tactics, of course, with Kip Sabian helping out there. But Layla Hirsch, I think, is a potential star. I don't want to say she's a star at this stage, but I think she has a chance if she gets enough work that I think she can be the AEW Women's Champion. She's got the talent. I don't even care that she's 4'11". She's dynamite. Pardon the word there, but she's dynamite. She's just really good in the ring. I've watched every match that I've seen her do in the last few months on AEW programming. She's done a great job. She's been a really solid competitor. She has a really good background, so I think she's got a good chance to be really a big focal point in the AEW women's division. And I do agree with you. Kenny Omega, he's usually pretty good about these things, but at this point, women's wrestling in AEW, let's not go there so fast. Maybe when you add like a Taya Valkyrie, maybe she comes to AEW. I think she goes to WWE to be with her husband, Johnny Morris, in there. But she could be a good addition to AEW, so we'll see what happens there. But I want to make a point to Impact's last pay-per-view we just saw this past weekend. I got to tell you, the match for me, the match of the night for me was the tag team match with Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers. But I have to say this. One in particular wrestler was above them all, and his name is Moose. Moose, to me, for what he did in that match, I thought he was the best. We all know what we expect. We already know what to expect out of Kenny Omega. We know that. But Moose, to me, was the best surprise of the night. I thought I think that was a star-making performance for him. To be in the ring with somebody like Kenny Omega, Rich Swann's a good wrestler as well. But if I was Impact, I'm putting the title on Moose as soon as possible because when Moose's contract ends, which I have no idea when it is, AEW and WWE will be fighting for him because Moose has the total package. I don't even think he needs to go to NXT. I think he can go right to the main roster and be on, maybe on a Royal Rumble, in future Royal Rumbles, as a surprise on the main roster. Moose, to me, was the competitor of that pay-per-view. And, of course, I'm a big fan of his. He's got ties to Syracuse as a former football player. So I would love to see Moose. I don't even want to see Moose in Impact anymore. I really want to see him in AEW or WWE, but I know that's not going to happen. So, Impact, I'm begging you, do something with Moose. Put the damn title on him. Rich Swann doesn't need the title. Put the title on Moose.
We're going to finish this week's up show with some TV news and notes that have come out. First, we start WWE Backstage with Renee Paquette. I guess that's how they're going to announce her because she officially works for Fox, but she's coming back with WWE Backstage at least for one more show the night before the Royal Rumble on FS1. Should be interesting. They're getting the whole band back together. That was one of the highlighted shows. That Talking Smack. There's a few other shows that were really good in the world of WWE that kind of went backstage and made me reminiscent to the Confidential days. There was Confidential in like the early 2000s. Then there was like Nothing Any Good. And then there was Talking Smack and Backstage. So Backstage, for the time being, is returning. And something that could make a difference at the year's end. And that is, it was announced today that NBC Sports Network is going to cease operations by the end of 2021. And the idea is that some of their sports programming, whether it be Wednesday Night Hockey, is going to move to some of the other NBC Universal stations, such as the USA Network, which means that programs like Monday Night Raw and more, especially NXT on the USA Network, could be up in the air for where they go by year's end as the NBC Sports Network tries to move some of its sports programming as the network ceases to exist to other networks like USA. And we've seen USA in the past have hockey, playoff hockey games. And I even want to say they had like some football games on for a minute or two and some other stuff that NBC had rights to that they tried to put over on the USA Network. So it'll be curious and interesting to see how they move around because USA Network, let's be serious, their best program right now is WWE, and that's not saying anything good for WWE. That's just essentially saying they're like the WWE Network in the fact that we all buy it for the pay-per-views, or we all watch certain networks for NFL football or stuff like that, and that's what USA is. Outside of wrestling, they don't have other live programs. They don't have an NFL package or NBA package or really hit shows. I mean, they have things like Suits and Ms. and Mrs. and all this other stuff. They get okay ratings, but they're not sitcom Thursday night NBC kind of ratings. So their best programming, the programming that they hold dearest, is the stuff that is live and is the stuff that has an audience like wrestling or sports. So if they have a chance to have sports on their network like Wednesday Night Hockey, they're going to take it. So if that means moving NXT to Thursday or Tuesday night so that they can have extra sports on there instead of more Law and Order reruns, they will take it. So we'll find out obviously at year's end, but I have a feeling by the end of 2021, we'll probably have a lot more things that have transpired in our world in the terms of programming and wrestling that are probably more interesting than that. But as of today, it's an interesting thing to think about, as that's the way we're going to end this week's show. We didn't get a chance to talk about the greatest return to wrestling probably since Edge last year at the Royal Rumble, talking about Goldberg showing up on Raw this past week, and or Randy Orton doing his best impression of that weird kid from the movie Us by Jordan Peele with his burned fire mask on. And we'll talk whether he should show up to the Royal Rumble against Bray Wyatt in a Kane mask. Maybe? That'd be kind of cool, right?
Absolutely.
Either way, I thought Randy Orton's vignette this week as a burn victim was pretty decent. We'll talk more of that, see where he goes with it on Raw. We'll talk AEW and Dolph Ziggler's brother making his debut on Dynamite next week. That and much more. But for now, this is Brandon on the other side of the camera. I'm Jared, and this has been the Heel to the Face podcast. We'll see you next week.